It's lovely to be here. I've been living in the Cardiff, South Wales area now for 12 years. I've been in Europe for 17, so hopefully that will give me a bit of special dispensation, because for the first 41 years of my life, those of you who can do the math, I lived in the United States. And one of the things that surprised me the most and really heartened me was the way in which, when I was growing up, politics and political situations inspired me. When I was a youth of 14, 15 years old, I was involved, because of the progressive nature of the state in which I lived, in a number of student council activities, not just in my school, but at the state level, because we had politicians who recognized the value of involving youth in what was going on around them. And one of the interesting things is that back in the 1970s, we lived in a time where if you disagreed with somebody's ideology or point of view, you didn't need to become personally disagreeable. You found a way to get things done. Now, the state that I grew up in was actually a Commonwealth, so not too far removed from the UK, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we were a very progressive state. We elected to the Senate, one of our two senators was Ted Kennedy, whose name many of us might at least recognize. The second you won't recognize until I describe who he was. Ted Kennedy, first of all, was a Democrat, so it meant he was more to the left of the spectrum. But the other person who was elected was a man named Edward Brooke. Edward Brooke was the United States' first African-American moderate Republican senator. Together, he and Ted Kennedy would not find a lot of policy on which they would agree, but yet they found something called the middle ground, because they knew they had a job to do. They had bills to write and legislation to pass. At the state level, our governors, our representatives were often from completely opposite parties, but they had a mandate every year to balance their budget. So if you have that, you've got to find a way to get things done. But what we've seen happen over the course of the last 20, 30 years is the middle ground has completely disappeared from our discussions. We are either very solidly on the right of the spectrum or very solidly on the left of the spectrum, and never the twain shall meet. And this is a disease that unfortunately started in my country and has managed to infect a lot of what goes on here as well. You always had government and you always had opposition, but not to the level of total despising of the other individual that you do today. I visited with a AM recently, and as we were walking down towards his office, I was asking what was going on with some of the offices around him. And he said, well, that person's a member of the Conservative Party, we don't talk to him. And that was so illustrative of where we are today, not just here in Wales, nationally, internationally. You're either with us or you're against us, to quote the previous US president. And that's wrong, because we're not getting anything done. We're not finding common ground, and we're not solving the issues of the day. Now, my love of politics began back in, say, 1973, which was quite a few years ago, when I got an invitation to participate in a program that is still going today, 40-something years old, almost 50 years old, called Close-Up. Close-Up was an experiential learning program where students from area high schools got on the train together from all over Massachusetts, took the train down to Washington, D.C., and we spent a week immersed in how our government works. It cost $200. It was an enormous amount of money. We could not figure out how we were going to find a way to do this so that I would be able to go. So I just worked for it. A lot of people did. It got to the point where I said that my parents kicked it a bit, that it was something that was one of the more formative experiences of my life, because we were talking to both Edward Brooke and Ted Kennedy and other members of the government, including former Supreme Court justices, and we got invited to the White House to see Richard Nixon. So it was a very different time. We didn't have devices. We didn't have iPads. We didn't have smartphones. You know, as a young kid, I would go to the library to read the New York Times and the Washington Post, papers of record. You know, the idiot that was there doing it. But it was fascinating to see what was going on in the Congress, that we only had that paper or the 22 minutes of news on the television that we had. Now, look at where we are today. All of the cable channels, all of the pundits, myself, who, anytime the phone rings, well, yes, we'll talk. We'll go there, and we'll listen to what the other person has to say. But mostly, we're there to do one thing. We're there to wait for our turn to talk. So there's no communication. There's nothing happening. I can remember sitting there on the set of the Sharp End as the Tory MP from the Mail and an AM from somewhere were just going at each other like children in a schoolyard. And Adrian Masters, the host, said, "Dennis, what do you as a journalist think of this?" And I said, "This is why people don't like politics. People are behaving like children and getting away with it." The United States president is often called the most powerful man or woman in the world. I say man because there's been 44 men in a row. Yet, here we are involved in a race to replace President Barack Obama on both parties. And what do we get? Donald Trump, 24/7, taking what used to be conveniently held in the closet, racist views and opinions, and putting them out there on mainstream television. And every news outlet gives him 39 or 43 minutes of broadcast time in the course of an hour. Our discourse is so poisonous now that it has forced me to turn around and look at it. I don't accept any invitations anymore if it's just they're looking for a left person to debate with the right person. Because all I know is going to happen is my blood pressure is going to raise by about 50 points. We're not going to accomplish anything. We'll each raise the rhetoric of our talking points, and nothing good will come. There will be no solution, there will be no discussion. Yet the examples that I talked about as a kid were so powerful, I refuse to believe that they cannot work again today. If you are electing your assemblyman to represent you, you need to demand, no matter what side you actually fall on, that your party get together with the other party to come up with a solution. You need to demand that the people's business is conducted openly and transparently. And if you're not, then shame on you, because you're letting them get away with murder. You're letting them do their business instead of the people's business. And if you want to see a broken system, look 3,000 miles across the ocean to Washington, D.C., where you have a whole bunch of lobbyists and 200 billionaires that are going to decide who the next president of the United States will be, solely on the basis of how deep their wallet is, how much money they can pull out of that wallet for someone to run a tank against. That's insanity. Now, I've had a number of careers. I started in the banking business, figured out that I really did not want to do what you do, which is spread numbers on sheets and look for green eye shades and figure out, yes, we can lend you $100 million. That was not a particularly difficult decision, yet that was what they were grooming me to do. Give them the $100 million, they go off and have a 3-martini lunch. And I thought, no, that's not what I'm about. So I moved to Florida, and in Florida, I had the opportunity to be exposed to a marketplace that was really trying to change and grow, and that was Miami. And while I was in Miami, I learned about economic development. I learned about the hard work required in talking to a company and convincing them to come from New York or Ohio or wherever and relocate their operations to Miami because we had a number of benefits. We listed off the nicest being, of course, the weather. But we understood what was involved in bringing the private sector and the public sector together. And we created something down there called the Beacon Council. And we put a 30-year plan in place back in 1985. And I was gone after the first 7 or 8 years of it. But I can tell you that every single milestone in that 30-year plan was hit. How? Why? Because everybody was treated equally in the Beacon Council. I was working at that time, I moved from the banking sector to work for Price Waterhouse. So if I went on a call with someone representing the Beacon Council, someone from Arthur Anderson was there with me, or someone from Deloitte & Touche was with me, because no one was allowed to have a competitive advantage if you were doing the business of the city of Miami. We were all in this together, and we knew that a rising tide would lift all boats, and that the time to pitch our services to a company were after they had managed to relocate and get themselves set. Unfortunately, far too often in our community, a lot of people's first response is, what's in it for me now, today, as opposed to what is the long-term best interest and best investment for the people involved. Now, when I left the accountancy world, I moved to Los Angeles, and I became a lobbyist. I worked in Washington and Los Angeles, so I'm back and forth. And one of the businesses that we represented was involved with this new thing called the internet. And we were looking at that, we were trying to figure out, well, on behalf of our clients, they needed something called encryption technology, something called the Clipper chip. The Clipper chip was controlled by the Department of Defense. They obviously did not want to release encryption technology to the marketplace because they wanted to be able to look and see what was going on. And if everybody had the same encryption technology, then how could they control it? So we had to do a very, very sophisticated lobbying effort, starting with now Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, who was then a representative who ran the House Commerce Committee, which is where we first started to look at how do we bring this technology into the marketplace to benefit everybody. Now, when most people say, I'm a lobbyist, you think of one thing. You think that all they do is walk around and hand out checks to politicians to buy their vote. No, this was different back then. We're talking 1990. So we were focused on how do we take 1990, 1991 technology and convert it in such a way that we will be able to conduct commerce on the internet. It's a very different picture of the lobbyists today. And I still believe that there is a place for that type of lobbying. And one of the things I like to say an awful lot is that every step you take along the path builds path behind you. And while you may not be sure where you're going, by looking over your shoulder and seeing from where you've come, you can see the direction in which you're headed. And when I left both of those legal and lobbying firms, it was not in the best of circumstances. I was fired. Now, we had that nice euphemistic term that it was creative differences, or, we both decided to go in another direction. We all signed up little confidentiality agreements. They gave me a lot of money to go away, and I said thank you, and off I went. But facing the fact that all of a sudden, on that pathway, there's a wall. It could happen to anybody at any point in time in their career. And what are you going to do with it? Well, I didn't handle it well. I convinced myself I would do lots of good things. But no, I was hurt. Use the services of people like yourselves back then. But at that point in time, it opened a new path. And that was when I met my wife, and in 1998, came to the Netherlands. I had nowhere else to go. Okay. New chapter. So now I'm on career number 4, perhaps. being an interim manager and a consultant and all these other things that we euphemistically call keeping our options open. We've done it. We've all done it. I don't know whether it's James Brown or that music that's going to be going. We kept our options open. My wife and I built a business in the Netherlands. And then we had the opportunity to come over here, back in 2003, and we moved lock, stock, and barrel with 3 small children here to Wales. And promptly went into business with people of, I would say, let's just say that we have an integrity challenge. All right? Do good work, but at the end of the day, you felt even with a shower, you were still there. That type of business. But each step along that pathway helped to build the path going forward to where we are today. Now, our businesses do, thankfully, very well in a bunch of different areas. The biggest was 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to take my passions for writing, both books and as a journalist, and see if there was a way to take this emerging technologies before Huffington Post and all these other things, and see if one could produce news on the web. That's what we did. And I've created a magazine which is now 9 years old, called UK Progressive. It has 300,000 readers every month. We have a very strong and loyal, devoted group of contributors, about 47 of them, who keep it going for me, because I don't have many time anymore to write. And even if I wanted to, I don't think I can kill it, because thankfully, there are a lot of people out there that want to have the long-form, progressive look at what is going on in the world, and it does well. And then my friend Phil Parrott, maybe a name some of you remember from BBC 4 or 5 years ago. He was an anchor here for a number of years. He came to me and he said 2 years ago, we should do a podcast. And I said, yeah, okay, Phil. And I kept hoping he would forget about the idea. But every 2 or 3 months he'd say, where are we on that podcast? Oh, it's coming along. It's coming along. We'll have it any day now. And then we just kept on. Finally, it was too much. And on the day of the Scottish in or out referendum, the 18th of September of last year, we had our first episode of the 3 Month Breakers. And now 42 episodes later, this weekly podcast, taking a few weeks off, will be a year old next week. So I had that with Phil and Dr. Dario Linares at the University. And it's 3 guys sitting around talking about global politics, Welsh politics, UK politics. And if you're into that, you can find us on iTunes under UK Progressive Podcast, so we're 3 Month Breakers. So suddenly, people are taking interest in it, and we did our first interview for a magazine, a video magazine in the States, where the 3 of us were actually being interviewed, and we took over the show. And then I realized, let's let Rick do a show. It's his show, it's not ours. But we've got a really good rapport amongst ourselves. One of the issues that continually comes up is I find ourselves spending time, and we have to struggle not to win. We have to struggle not to just complain about the state of politics, but to offer solutions, suggestions, etc. And we're all 3 left, no question about it. We call Dr. Dario our far left winger. We call Phil our more just slightly left or right winger, because he's always been in the middle. And I'm somewhere in the middle out there. We care very much about social justice. We care very, very much about issues that affect people that are being totally ignored. So it's become a good platform for us to discuss where we want to go. And then along came the UK general election. Now, I became a subject of Her Majesty in 2010, and that came with a set of responsibilities that I felt were important. I have 3 children who are teenagers. I'm very worried that 70% of the jobs in Wales either are directly on the government teat or are solely there because of the government teat. I'm very worried that over 75% 1,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost. Yet we have these departments in the Welsh Assembly government that produce a press release every time 6 jobs are created. You hear nothing when 3,000 go out the door, or a factory closes down and takes 6,000. And we have an arrogance to the government that's been in power for 16 years, to the needs of what's out there. They think they can just continue the status quo. Well, they've never heard of a man by the name of Bernie Sanders. I don't know if you've heard of him either. But Google him, watch some YouTube videos. He is taking the United States by storm because he talks about the one thing that affects every one of us in America, and that is this crushing inequality that is out there. Crushingly, really holding everyone back, reducing everyone's wages, and we're not living in a fair society by any stretch of the imagination. And Bernie has taken a page out of another name. If you've not heard of her, you should Google her, Elizabeth Warren. She is a superstar in terms of saying the things that need to be said about what the banksters have done to the economy, what has happened to our jobs, what has happened to our economy, going to not the 1% or the 1/10 of the 1%, or more than half of the world lives in poverty. I'm not saying wealth redistribution. What I'm saying is bring back some fundamental fairness into the system. So as I looked at all these things, and I write my articles every week, I write something called the Monday Line every week in the UK Press. And when I first started, I used to write 7 or 8 a day. Now I write 1 a week. So that's, I think, improved. I think that's a benefit. But I always struggle until I come back to this one subject. I'm so tired of writing about what is wrong. I'm so tired of talking about all the ways in which we're being pulled apart. So today, I took a monumental decision, not just today, but looking at it for 4 or 5 months. And I joined the Liberal Democrats, and I will be standing as an assembly member, hopefully, for the assembly in the upcoming election in May. The reason being is I'm tired of our inability to get along. I want to see us come together and build bridges. And I can't see Labour taking the step across to meet with the Conservatives. I can't see the Conservatives taking. They need a bridge in the middle. And that is what our party's about. That's what I'm looking for. Is finding ways to help us rebuild that middle ground that we've lost. Because without it, we will all surely perish. We need to find a way to take the rhetoric and the politics and find ways to get stuff done. Because if we don't, I don't want to think about what's going to happen in the West. I don't think about what's going to happen in the UK. I don't think it's going to happen in the United States. We've got to set examples. We've got to do it one step at a time. Because that path that we have been building with each step we take, we will continue to build. Because now, at least, pretty much everybody in this room has the maturity and the ability to know that this is what we need to do. We need to somehow inspire people to give up hope. We need to motivate them. We need to motivate everyone to demand that their representatives represent them. I'll take any questions.
I think it's hard to get your head around, isn't it, that something that's so obvious, just doesn't imply, and it comes down to ego. Would you say? Is that the biggest problem? It's all about me.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain amount of that. I mean, ego does cause a lot of problems in the world. And I'm not sure you can ever do away with ego. I think I have a strong ego. But do you allow it to control you? That's the issue. Okay? You can have a strong presence, you can be a very strong person. If it's all about you, though, and ego, forget about it. I couldn't getting that? Are they understanding how that has formed? They need to do massive work to fix it, because what's happening is that the customer is not the first thing anybody thinks about. The customer ranks about 7th or 8th on the list of the matrices that they're beaten over the head with in terms of time. You know, when that Tesco driver pulls up to your house, he has 6 minutes. 6 minutes from the time he shuts the engine off to unload your order, take it in, give it to you, get it signed, come back, get into the truck and go off to the next one. If it gets underneath that 6 minute, he doesn't get any kudos. He only gets in trouble if it's 6 minutes and 30 seconds. And then he's brought in to talk to his manager. What are you teaching people? You know, if you're going to front and stock a shelf, you have, I think it's like 11 minutes in which to front a shelf, and I think it's 32 minutes. I mean, I don't understand all the matrices because I was inside the hot house, which was supposed to be the shining example of where they were going in the future. And you think, well, what do you, and then God forbid anybody should interrupt that person with a question. Excuse me, can you tell me where I'd find? You can see the panic come over their face because the clock is running. And that's way over on aisle 32. And it's going to take me time to walk that customer over, find it, come back, and I'm going to get dinged for it. And we wonder why service is so poor. We're not teaching people how to serve. When I was a kid, I worked for Tedeschi's supermarket, Angelo Tedeschi. 89-year-old Angelo Tedeschi was wheeled up and down the store in a wheelchair, smiled at everybody, greeted everybody. The manager, he didn't hide somewhere in an office and pour over figures. He spent probably 85% of his shift walking through the store, checking on what was being done, if it was up to the standard that he wanted. And I tell you, when I saw Bill Gear, even at the age of 16, I knew this was somebody who cared. He taught us from in the old days, we were bag boys. We had to take these paper sacks, lay them out, and then load them systematically. Couldn't make them too heavy. Just to make sure that they were properly balanced. And to this day, even though I can't find them, I can pack a square bag better than anybody else. You know, they're all different ways, etc. Those lessons that we learn in life by mentors and teachers stick with us forever. Are our youth getting those today? I don't know. I would venture to say probably not. And if not, why not? And if not, what can we do to bring folks together to solve that? Because that's a problem, that's an issue. What are we doing for our kids going forward? How are we preparing them? They're all going to be paying your pensions. My pension going forward. My parents were part of the 40 club. God, I love them. They both gone. But they worked 40 years. 40 years for 40 hours a week for a 40% cut in pay when they retired. And their whole life was built around my sister and myself. The way they sacrificed for us and the way they grew for us. We saw that and we appreciated it. How much sacrifice do kids today see? Do they know? You know, the Chinese have a saying, slippers to slippers in 3 generations. First generation, it works very hard to build something. Second generation saw how hard the first generation worked. So they continue the hard work. They actually, the first generation probably needed shoes. What happens is the third generation, not seeing the struggle of the first generation, only living in what the second generation brought, further away, and then back to slippers. That's the whole Chinese philosophy. And I'm worried that we're doing the same thing because we're not putting a premium on hard work. And I always tell people about an internship I did when I was at university with David Oakley. This is a man who ran a living in America. He was probably considered the giant of the advertising industry. But I did. I got coffee and I emptied ashtrays. Back then you could smoke in offices. All right. But I also got to listen to what was going on in those meetings, where all these great ad people came up with adverts like, at 60 miles an hour, the noisiest thing in this Rolls Royce is the clock. You know, that drove the engineers of Rolls Royce absolutely crazy, trying to figure out what they could do to make the clock sound. All right? But to understand the creative process that was going on. How many people come out of university today with a degree in advertising and think that they're going to go to the top agency in Cardiff instantly? Not willing to be a receptionist, not willing to be an intern, not willing to